Well, hi, Robert. Thanks for helping me with my project.
No problem. Happy to help.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Robert, Robert Clark, born in California, live in Texas. I'm a software engineer, big space enthusiast, and someone who's always looking for what's happening in the news with space. So I'm happy to be here.
Wow, so you've been able to make the transition from California to Texas just fine.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's been almost 5 years now, and we love it. Couldn't be happier here.
So Tesla shouldn't have any problem.
No, I was looking at that, and if they come to Austin, they might find my job application in there somewhere.
That'd be great. I always feel like moving down to Boca Chica. I'd love to work on the Starship.
I know they had that. They had like an open call for jobs down there like a month or two ago, and I was like, man, I should just hop in the car and drive down there just to be able to walk on the property, since they were doing open invitation interviews. So
And who could pass up a mariachi band?
I know, right? I wonder if they recreated that original photo from 2000, what was it, like 2005 or so at SpaceX with Elon, and he's got the
Yeah.
maracas.
No, I don't know.
That would have been a missed opportunity if they didn't.
So I normally ask people if they've heard about us going to the moon in 2024, but I presume you know. So when did you find out?
Um, that's a good question. Probably several years ago. Um, I don't follow the news super closely, but I try and find as many headlines as I can in the mainstream news about NASA. So I think about 2 years ago, they talked about some of the Artemis missions and the moon return and all of that idea. So I've been keeping my ears out ever since.
What's your feeling of 2024? You think it's going to happen or probably slip?
That's really close. Because I do government contracting for work, so I'm a little bit familiar with the speed of government, and 2024 is close, man, in terms of planning. So I hope we can make it. I hope that if it doesn't happen through SLS or other government programs, that it happens through Blue Origin or SpaceX partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, using a full Starship to go from lunar orbit to, the lunar surface, and then that Dear Moon mission to actually send those artists around the moon in 2023, you're like, well, isn't that the whole system, like between those two?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like that should be, and maybe that's their secret plan is those are two testbed missions, you know? So,
Yeah, and I wonder, 2024 would be within the next presidential term. I wonder if even if we have a change in administrations, if they look at that and they go, wow, that would be really good to have on my watch. Or
yeah, that's a good point. I'm not, claiming to be a fan one way or the other of current administration, but it seems like that would be a very, pro-American thing. So hopefully that, funding stays intact and the mission stays intact because of that perspective.
yeah, I almost feel like the more progress they could make before like the first quarter of next year is like going to be key, because it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to the moon and, before the end of my administration and then not do it. It's another thing to say we're going to do it and actually happens, right? So,
Yeah, and it's these types of programs are super expensive. So if you don't start seeing a return on investment, and I mean that from like a public perspective, right? Because there could be all sorts of scientific and technological advances that are progressing, but if that's not seen by taxpayers in Congress, they start to lose interest, you know? So
and I mean, that's another kind of interesting point. You and I are both interested in space. I'm sure your Twitter feed, Facebook page is like, has space stuff all over it. Of the like 150 interviews I've done so far, I would say only 20 people knew that we're going to the moon in 2024.
oh wow.
And in fact, one even went so far as saying, I don't understand why NASA is keeping it a secret.
Conspiracies.
I know, I know. But that just goes to show you like how we don't read the same newspaper. We don't see the same nightly news. We literally all live in our own world.
Right.
I mean, I think we could easily go to the moon and 70% of the population doesn't even know it.
No, I totally agree. And it's different than 1969 because, you know, where there was only 3 television networks and one nightly news program, you know, now you have hundreds and hundreds of sources of news, media, entertainment. So at the wide scale coverage and kind of the uniformity of the country focusing on that set of missions, I don't know if that can come back again. So I don't doubt that we could go and come back and half the world wouldn't even know.
I mean, I feel like that the only advertisement that can reliably go across bubbles is probably billboards on the highway.
Right? Probably. Everybody sees those at some point or another.
Exactly. What do you think about us going back to the moon in 2024?
So I think it's a positive step. I think that there's a lot of positive consequences to space travel and space exploration that I think have been lost in the last generation because there hasn't been a lot of space activity, as opposed to the Apollo, missions, the shuttle program, all the STS missions. Like I remember seeing shuttle launches as a kid and just thinking like, this is the greatest thing of all time. And we're approaching a decade of no U.S. launches. And even prior to that, I mean, there was space station missions, but the space station was pretty well built, almost within 2 decades now. So there hasn't been a lot of exciting, get people excited and get kids inspired stuff for a generation and a half now, almost. So I'm eager because I think there's a lot of value in that. I think inspiring millions of people is something that's hard to quantify in cost, but I think it is achievable through kind of the excitement of space exploration. So in short, that's a very long explanation for, I think, going back to the moon. And if the Lunar Gateway happens and other Mars missions, I think this is the start of hopefully reinvigorated scientific and technologically excited kids and generations.
So I definitely, I completely agree with you and come from like the same place. But the part that I find challenging is how can it inspire people if people don't know about it?
True. Yeah. And I think that's where you have the scientific community and people in it that are really good at science, right? And they're probably not really good at things like marketing, right? Because there's people that, entire PR firms that's their gig and that's what they do. And that's a different skill set and a different community than scientists and technology professionals. So I totally agree with you. I think there has to be a bona fide PR campaign run by PR firms that gets this message out there. I don't know if that existed in the early days in the Apollo or not, or if it was just so new and novel that it, generated interest in and of itself. But there's so much competition these days for your attention that it almost seems like it's almost impossible to grab that type of attention without having a bona fide effort behind, ads, campaigns, and stuff like that. So people got to know, and that's going to be a challenge. I totally agree with you there.
A couple of days ago, I interviewed my niece and actually they're like my great niece and 2 great nephews. The oldest was 13, the youngest was 6. And I asked them that question, what does NASA need to do to get out there more? And they're like, advertise. And I was like, well, what was the last advertisement you remember seeing? And can you guess what it was?
No, maybe Frozen 2 or Disney something.
Liberty Mutual Car Insurance.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's definitely not their target market, but whatever
No.
Liberty Mutual did, maybe it's like the little jingle on it or something.
Well, and they've got the one with the emu, right? Those are pretty catchy.
Oh, really? I have
Yeah.
to look out for those. Yeah, maybe
So,
if we really want to get people excited about space, we need to study advertising.
no, I think there's some legitimate ideas there, because almost everything you come across these days is some form of advertisement or another, you know, be it physical in the world, billboards, street signs, or whatever, or digital, right? Um, Advertising is behind almost every major decision you're attempting to make, you know. So if that decision is to get inspired, there's probably going to be marketing behind it.
And I've interviewed people on the streets of Houston, you know, like homeless people. I mean,
Mhm.
I presume they're homeless. It's part of their job to appear homeless, I guess. And then also people on the streets of Minneapolis. And, you know, I kind of expected when talking to them about going to the moon, you know, that they would probably be more concerned about their day-to-day life. You know, why don't I have food? Why don't I have shelter? Where's my medical care and stuff like
Right.
that?
Instead
But
of a
they were,
$15.5 to launch a rocket
yeah,
one time.
exactly. That's what I expected. But
Right.
what they actually said was that they thought it was a good thing. I mean, they were for it. Now, the other side of it is, you know, I'm not sure how much of a tax base they are. So,
Right. True. Uh, and that's a good point, is because that's a common rebuttal to the space program in general, is it's astronomically expensive, or has been historically, and why aren't we spending that money on something more important, right? Why are we putting people on the moon when there's people starving still in the country? And I can sympathize with that sentiment, but I also agree that it's okay to have a division of budgets, and I think it's okay to spend money on future benefits as well as fighting current issues. Now, I don't necessarily think we need to bump up space spending to 4% of the national GDP like we did in the 60s. And I think one of the great ways that we can still move forward in our space advancements while not draining the national budget is to do the private government relationships that they've been doing. Like, shift some of that to private industry, so not all of that cost is coming out of the taxpayer base. And now we're exploring ideas on how to turn revenues in space. I'm okay with that, and I think that's a good way to kind of shift some of that social responsibility off of taxpayers, but also still have some benefit on both sides of that equation.
I know it's pretty amazing to think about. One of the rocket engines for the Artemis first stage, the SLS first stage, cost $100 million to manufacture. And you could buy, like, you know, almost 1.5, 2 Falcon 9 launches for that
Right.
amount and still
Just for
have
that.
the first stage to reuse.
Yeah. Yeah. The RS-25s are expensive buggers, man. And I think didn't they charge some astronomical fee for resetting up tooling and everything to manufacture new
Yeah, it's like
RS-25?
$1.2 billion for, I want to say, like, for like 12 of them
Yeah,
being built, something
something
crazy
like
like
that.
that.
Yikes.
It's not that we aren't spending enough money on space. We're just spending it wrong.
No, I think that's very true. I think there's a lot of better ways forward, and fortunately this time around, as opposed to 1969, I think we're doing a lot of it better. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah, I know. It's like you still have to pay off some people. I mean, it
Right.
really feels like that. It's like, okay,
Oh
we'll,
yeah.
we'll let you go off and do this other thing. But surely they see the writing on the wall. You know, it's like, you know, funding an aircraft company in the age of the railroads. You know, surely somebody's like connecting the dots,
Well, I mean, that's pretty much the whole crux behind calling it the Senate Launch System, right? SLS,
right?
is because there's a lot of senators and working class bases that support that are expecting those jobs.
Or,
So,
or even maybe it should be the Shelby launch system.
yeah.
Uh,
So,
anyway,
crazy.
well, you know, also another thing is about that opportunity cost that comes up several times in the conversations with people. But you know, if you think back in 1969, the world's population is like 3 billion people. We didn't have the internet. A larger percentage of the world was actually having to spend their days actually producing food and doing the things that keep us going. Now we have close to 7 billion people. So, you know, almost double the number of minds that could solve problems, more highly connected. I mean, in 1969, if your library didn't have a book, well, good luck, you're not going to learn it. But I mean, like
Right.
now on YouTube, I mean, you could download, I mean, you could watch Learn AutoCAD Fusion 360 in 30 days for free. You know, you get the software for free. Anybody in
Yeah.
the world can become like a mechanical designer using state-of-the-art tools. All you have to do is be connected to the internet. And it's just,
Right.
you know, I, I mean, it feels like we could solve any problem we want to, and we should be solving more problems somehow.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've I've held this belief for a long time that I really, really hope that the I forget the exact name, but essentially the space treaty that keeps weapons out of space. There's an international agreement that you can look from space and we can do a couple things, but we're not going to put weapons in space. I hope that holds because one of the great achievements of the space industry has been the level of international collaboration that it's been able to attain um, between countries that don't have a lot of reason to exchange technology otherwise. Um, so I hope that's something that can hold that sharing of technology and sharing of resources and expertise. Um, Now that's at a government level. At like a personal level, like you were saying, the knowledge is available to people. Sometimes there's some difficulty in sharing it because of, especially in a professional manner, because of like ITAR restrictions and things like that. So I would love to see a shift away from this notion that everything is about national security and missile technology, and maybe open the gates a little bit wider to allow some collaborative design, problem solving, and education. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, maybe the secret is maybe the Earth to space transportation systems would still be very much controlled, but maybe like space to space or space to moon or space to Mars, it's
Yeah,
like those systems are similar, but I mean, I think there's some distinctions between them that maybe those could be more collaborative.
yeah, it's like international waters rules. It's like we're kind of beyond the scope of your control, so maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I've read a book earlier this year called Violent Borders, and it was
Hmm.
talking about the law of the sea, which was basically you know, an international treaty in the late 1980s that essentially extended out these zones of influence from the shore. So pretty much, other than like in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, everything's controlled by somebody at this point.
Yeah,
It's like kind of kind of
no
crazy.
more pirate radio. Bummer.
Yeah, exactly. You need to have like a floating, you know, dirigible or something to,
Yeah, with like a terawatt of power.
yeah.
You're in the middle of the ocean.
Um, the other thing that I've talked to people about, which is surprising, is people are really afraid, not a large number of people, but it's come up enough times that it is a trend that, you know, what about messing up the moon and messing up Mars and, you know, polluting space like we're polluting Earth? And that was something I've really been challenged with because
Mhm.
I have trouble thinking of pollution without like an ecosystem. You know, like if you're
Right.
not hurting like living stuff, then it's just basically, I mean, just feels like, um, you know, just, I mean, well, where's the harm?
Yeah.
But it's come up a lot. I was wondering what you thought about those people who are like, hey, what if, and you know, the poles of the moon in those craters that are permanently shadowed, and it's colder than it is on the surface of Pluto, that materials have kind of made it into over billions of years. potentially there could be frozen organic material
Right,
from like the early periods of the Earth's history, which could be extremely unique and valuable.
right. So, so there's kind of two parts in there that you brought up. One that I think is really important right now is space debris. Um, I would not be opposed to some types of modern regulation that say, beyond 2030, you can't leave crap in space anymore.
Mhm.
Like nothing expendable uh, that's just going to stay in orbit for 10,000 years, you know? I think that's a huge issue, especially as we try things like putting up a constellation of Starlink satellites for, 40,000 internet-based satellites. So space debris, I think, is a big issue. Now, going beyond LEO to the moon and Mars, um, I kind of agree with you. I don't think it's that big of a deal, um, mostly because there's not visible life. Now, I'm not saying we should disregard it entirely. Um, I think it would be a case of, well, let's land on Earth, I mean, on Moon or Mars. Expansion is going to happen eventually. That's just human nature. We're going to bring with us bacteria and stuff. You can't prevent that, especially if you're going to have people living there. Visiting is one thing, living is completely different, right? And I think it's just going to have to move on a case by case basis from there, kind of like we do now. You want to go build a new structure, you have to do a building permit, and in most cases, an environmental impact study, right? And then you get approved for the building permit. I see something similar on Mars and the moon that I think would satisfy the requirement. You want to build another structure, mine over there, do whatever. Let's do an environmental impact study. If everything's clear over there and there's no, 3 billion-year-old ancient microbial frozen cells, good to go. Mine all you want. But to just kind of blanket statement say we shouldn't go to the moon or we shouldn't go to Mars or we shouldn't expand beyond Earth because we're worried about bringing our biology with us. I don't buy that argument. I think there's some merit in looking and being careful while we go, but I definitely think we do go.
Yeah, and whenever they brought back the rock samples from the moon, they purposely set aside some sealed that they didn't open or analyze, knowing that later on new techniques would be developed. And they wanted to preserve them for these later techniques. And some of those have been open now that we're planning to go back to the moon, which is kind of exciting. I almost feel like that maybe we should take the same approach with the moon and Mars, just like, segregate sections that, hey, we're just going to leave this pristine, until we find out more. And this other part, we're just going to, go and explore and learn everything that we can learn. And, we'll make mistakes, sure. But, either it's, not doing something is making a mistake or doing something is making a mistake. Let's, let's go actually do something to learn from it, and then,
Yeah.
whenever we become more mature and more capable and have better insights and a better perspective, then we can start expanding.
I think that's a good approach. It's like almost like the space national parks idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, if it was affordable and safe, would you have an interest in personally going into space?
Absolutely. It's on
Abs-
my bucket list. Saving my money as soon as I send my kid off to college and pay off my house. That's where my money is going. So,
so how safe does it need to be?
um, I would go now. Uh,
Okay.
so so I would be more than happy to launch myself on a Falcon 9 and a Dragon 2, or on a Soyuz out of Kazakhstan. So
So if Tom Cruise needs a good villain, you might be willing to sign up.
totally. Now the decision is only halfway mine. My wife says that the house has to be paid off, the kid has to be out of the house, and she has to be set for retirement, and then I'm okay to go. So that in the likelihood of death, it's everything is set up.
I a couple of years ago we did the zero G flight, where you could get the
Oh yeah.
weightlessness, and I wanted to do it with me, my two sons, and my wife, and I couldn't convince my wife. She was like, "Somebody needs to live."
I've always wanted to do those. Those look awesome.
Yeah, it's a good experience. It's really short, 30 to
Yeah.
40 seconds, and a total of 7 minutes of weightlessness. It's quite something. But
So I've done something similar. I used to fly Cessna 150s and 172s back when I was younger, and we would do zero gravity dives. You dive real deep, and then you go into a climb, and then you just kind of do this soft cresting arch, and then you fall, and at the proper rate so that you get that weightlessness feeling. So
did you get your private pilot's license?
I did back when I was 18. So I started flying at 12. In fact, I wasn't even tall enough to see over the dash of the Cessna because the dash is pretty high. There's a lot of
Oh
instruments in there.
yeah.
And so they used to put a big fat cushion underneath me so that I could see over. I could still reach the pedals. I soloed at 16 on my birthday because that was the federal requirement, and then licensed at 18. Now that was 14 years ago, and it was fun to do on my parents' dime. It got really expensive when I had to pay for it myself, and you're renting a plane at $120 an engine hour, you know, plus $4.50 a gallon for fuel. So I haven't. It's probably lapsed, and I wish I would get back into it. But man, it was great. I loved it.
I'm trying to get my pilot's license, so I'm flying a 172 right now. But even at this height, I still have trouble seeing enough over the dash, so I
Yeah,
could just imagine.
yeah, it was hard.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was really great to get your perspective on these things.
Yeah, I appreciate you letting me do the participate in the moon program with you.
Well, sounds good. Well, let's keep in touch.
All right, thanks, Nathan. Talk to you later.
Bye bye.